A cop steals a luxury car from a young black girl, convinced there's no way it could possibly belong to her. But just 2 minutes later, he's locked inside, completely powerless, and begging for mercy. Because this isn't just any car. It's been built with secrets, proof, and a legacy that could destroy him. What did this officer do in the past? And why was he so terrified once the truth started playing back in real time? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the garage floor as Zaria Bennett's wrench clicked one final time. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a small grease mark she didn't notice. The sound echoed through the small space, mixing with the familiar scents of motor oil and metal. "That's the last one, Dad," she whispered, running her fingers along the smooth curve of the 1969 Mustang's midnight blue hood. The car gleamed under the slanting sunlight that filtered through the dusty garage windows. Her eyes drifted to the workbench where a worn photograph hung in a simple wooden frame. Marcus Bennett smiled back at her, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, coveralls stained with the same kinds of grease marks she now wore. The photo had been taken right here in this garage, back when the Mustang was just a broken-down shell they'd bought from a junkyard. Zaria picked up a small paintbrush and white enamel, her movements careful and deliberate. Beneath the hood, in a spot only someone who knew where to look would find, she painted her father's initials, MB. Her hand trembled slightly, but the letters came out perfect, just like he'd taught her. "Okay, EOP," she said, setting down the brush. "Time to wake up." She reached into the car and pressed a hidden button beneath the dashboard. A soft blue light pulsed through the custom-modified displays. "Security protocols initiating," came her father's voice, warm and familiar, from the car's speakers. The sound made her breath catch, just like it did every time. "Voice recognition required." "Zaria Bennett," she said clearly. "Authorization Alpha 7 Delta." Identity confirmed. The voice was exactly as she remembered, gentle but strong, like her father had always been. "All systems operational, Zaria. The diagnostic results show the engine modifications are performing within expected parameters." She smiled, patting the car's hood. Her father had spent countless hours coding this AI system during his final months, recording his voice in secret. He'd known he wouldn't be around forever, but he'd made sure a part of him would stay with her. The creak of the side door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother stepped into the garage carrying 2 plates of dinner, simple sandwiches and some fruit. "Thought you might be hungry?" her mother said, settling onto an old folding chair. "Want to eat on the hood, just like old times?" Zaria nodded, carefully sitting on the Mustang's hood. The metal was still warm from the day's work. Her mother handed her a plate, and for a few moments they ate in comfortable silence. "He would be so proud of you," her mother finally said, looking at the restored car. "This was his dream, you know. Teaching you everything he knew about cars, watching you learn and grow." Zaria swallowed hard. "I just wish—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I wish he'd gotten more time with it. With us." Her mother's face darkened slightly. "What Grant and his people did to your father, framing him for that car theft ring, it was wrong. But Marcus never let it break his spirit. Not really. He just found different ways to fight back," Zaria said, running her hand along the smooth paint. The car represented everything her father had believed in, building things up instead of tearing them down, creating beauty from broken pieces, and most importantly, never giving up. "This car was his way of making sure you had something solid to hold on to," her mother said. "Something they couldn't take away." Zaria nodded, thinking about the long hours she and her father had spent in this garage before his imprisonment, how he'd taught her about every part and system. Even after he was gone, working on the Mustang had felt like keeping their conversations going. As the sun began to set, casting orange light through the windows, Zaria's mother gathered the empty plates. "Don't stay up too late, honey. You've got that conference tomorrow." "I won't," Zaria promised. She watched her mother leave, then went to her room to pack her bag for the morning. The Black Girls in STEM mentorship event was important, another way to honor her father's memory by sharing knowledge with others, just as he had shared with her. She laid out her conference outfit, a professional blazer and slacks, along with the pass she'd received as a young speaker. At 23, she'd already made a name for herself in AI development. Though few knew about EOP, her father's last and greatest creation. Back in the garage, Zaria connected her laptop to the car's systems. "Running overnight diagnostics," she said. "Initiating full system sync," her father's voice responded. "Sleep well, Zaria." She touched the hood one last time before heading to her room. Through her window, she could see the garage where the Mustang waited. More than just a car. It was her father's legacy, his way of protecting her even after he was gone. As she lay in bed, Zaria thought about how far they'd come from that first day when they'd towed the broken-down Mustang home. Her father had looked at that rusted shell and seen possibility. Sometimes the things that seem the most broken, he'd told her, just need someone to believe in them. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet hum of the house settle around her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the garage below, her father's voice lived on in the heart of the machine they'd built together. The next day, the morning sun spilled through Zaria's curtains, painting warm stripes across her bedroom floor. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet, but she was already awake, her mind running through the day ahead. The Black Girls in STEM conference had been marked on her calendar for months, a red circle around this date that seemed to pulse with possibility and purpose. She sat up, stretching, and looked at the carefully pressed outfit hanging on her closet door. The navy blazer and crisp white blouse were professional without being stuffy. Exactly the image she wanted to project to the young girls she'd be speaking to today. In the bathroom, Zaria took extra care with her appearance, making sure her braids were neat and her minimal makeup was perfect. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but her mind kept drifting to the speech she'd prepared. She wanted every word to count, to reach even the shyest girl in the back row. Downstairs, she found her mother already in the kitchen, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The morning light caught the silver strands in her mother's hair, making them shine like threads of starlight. "You're up early," her mother said, pulling Zaria into a tight hug. "Nervous?" "A little," Zaria admitted, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I keep thinking about what Dad would say if he were here." Her mother's eyes softened. "He'd tell you to show them exactly who you are." She set down her coffee cup and reached for something in her pocket. "Speaking of your father, I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this." In her mother's palm lay a simple silver necklace. The pendant was small and rectangular, catching the morning light as it turned. Zaria picked it up carefully, reading the engraved words, "Proof always wins." "Your father wore this every day," her mother said quietly. Even during the trial. He said as long as we kept searching for the truth, kept gathering proof, justice would have to follow." Her voice caught slightly. "He'd want you to have it today." Zaria's fingers trembled as she fastened the necklace around her neck. The metal was cool against her skin, but it felt right, like a piece of armor, or a blessing. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, hugging her mother tightly. Her mother squeezed back. "Go show them what a Bennett can do." The garage door opened smoothly, revealing the Mustang in the early morning light. The midnight blue paint seemed to absorb the sunlight and reflect it back deeper, richer. Zaria ran her hand along the hood as she walked to the driver's side door. "Good morning, EOP," she said as she settled into the leather seat. "Good morning, Zaria," her father's voice responded warmly. "Conference day." "That's right." She started the engine, its purr filling the small garage. "Let's make it count." The city streets were quiet this early, with just a few delivery trucks and early commuters sharing the road. Zaria inserted her father's old mixtape into the custom player she'd installed. The sounds of Al Green filled the car and she smiled, remembering how her father used to sing along, slightly off-key, but with his whole heart. As she drove from their modest neighborhood toward the wealthier suburbs where the conference center was located, the changes in the landscape were subtle but clear. The houses grew larger, the lawns more manicured, the cars more expensive. The Mustang drew attention, Heads turned as she passed, some admiringly, others with barely concealed suspicion. A jogger in expensive workout gear did a double take as she stopped at a stop sign, his eyes moving from the car to her face and back again. An older woman walking her poodle clutched her purse tighter as Zaria drove past. She'd seen these reactions before, knew what they meant, but she kept her eyes forward and her back straight. In her head, she rehearsed the opening of her speech. "When I was 12, my father taught me that anything broken can be fixed if you understand how it works. He showed me that knowledge isn't just power, it's freedom. It's proof that you belong exactly where you choose to be." The words felt right, felt true, but her stomach still fluttered with nerves. The conference center was just a few miles ahead now. She touched the necklace at her throat, drawing strength from its presence. The morning traffic was picking up, but the Mustang handled beautifully, responding to her lightest touch. This was what her father had wanted. For her to move through the world with confidence, to create something so undeniably excellent that no one could question her right to be wherever she chose. At a red light, movement in her rearview mirror caught her attention. A police cruiser was pulling up behind her, moving slowly, deliberately. Zaria's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but she kept her breathing steady. The light turned green and she accelerated smoothly, maintaining exactly the speed limit. The cruiser's lights flashed on, its siren giving a short whoop. Zaria's heart picked up speed, but her movements remained calm as she signaled and pulled over onto a quiet, tree-lined street. The shadows of maple leaves danced across her hood as she put the car in park. In her rear-view mirror, she watched Officer Grant step out of his cruiser. She recognized him immediately, the same man who had testified against her father, whose evidence had helped send an innocent man to prison. He adjusted his belt as he walked toward her car, his face set in what he probably thought was a neutral expression. Zaria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her father's necklace against her skin. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, just as her mother had taught her, and waited as Officer Grant's footsteps grew closer to her window. Officer Grant's knuckles rapped sharply against the window, his scowl already firmly in place before Zaria could even look up. She pressed the button, lowering the window just enough to communicate while maintaining a sense of security. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass from the manicured lawns around them, a stark contrast to the tension building in the space between them. "I'm on my way to the Black Girls in STEM conference," Zaria said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "I'm one of the speakers today." Her hand moved slowly toward her bag where her conference registration waited, careful not to make any sudden movements that might be misinterpreted. Grant's face twisted into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Whose car is this?" he demanded, completely ignoring her explanation. His hand rested on his belt, inches from his weapon, a gesture that seemed casual but carried clear intent. The morning sunlight glinted off his badge as he leaned closer to the window, invading her space. "It's my car," Zaria replied, her fingers closing around the registration papers. "I have all the documentation right here." She tried to keep her breathing even, remembering her Aunt Celeste's advice about interactions with law enforcement. "There's no way you can afford this car," Grant cut her off, his voice dripping with contempt. His eyes swept over the Mustang's pristine midnight blue paint, the gleaming chrome, the custom details that spoke of countless hours of careful restoration. "A car like this costs more than you make in a year." Zaria pulled out the registration papers, holding them up where Grant could clearly see them. "Sir, here's the registration and—" Her words were measured, rehearsed for moments exactly like this one. With a swift motion, Grant slapped the papers from her hand, sending them fluttering to the ground like wounded birds. Some landed in a puddle from yesterday's rain, the ink already beginning to blur. A passing jogger slowed briefly, then hurried away after catching Grant's warning glance. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice hard. "Over to the curb, now." His posture changed, shoulders squaring as he stepped back just enough to give her room to exit. Zaria felt fear crawling up her spine, but her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Always keep your dignity. That's something they can't take unless you let them." She unbuckled her seatbelt with deliberate movements, opened the door slowly, and stepped onto the curb. Her legs felt shaky, but she stood straight, her chin lifted slightly. The conference notes in her bag, her presentation on AI ethics, now seemed a world away. The scattered registration papers lay ignored on the ground as Grant reached into the car and grabbed the keys. "I'll be processing this vehicle myself," he said, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We've had reports of stolen classics in the area." His fingers caressed the leather-wrapped steering wheel possessively. "Sir, please," Zaria started, but Grant was already sliding into the driver's seat, the leather creaking under his weight. The engine roared to life, and Grant's smile widened into something ugly and triumphant. He revved the engine once, twice, as if taunting her. He pulled away from the curb, and as he turned the corner, his laughter drifted back to her through the open window. The sound seemed to hang in the air like poison, mixing with the exhaust fumes that lingered behind. Zaria stood on the curb, her fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. The necklace her mother had given her that morning felt heavy against her skin. Her father's words were engraved in the metal, "Proof always wins." She watched the Mustang disappear around the corner, taking with it years of work, memories, and her father's legacy. The weight of injustice pressed down on her shoulders, familiar yet no less painful. But something was about to change. As the Mustang's speedometer crept past 20 miles per hour, a series of mechanical clicks echoed through the cabin. Grant's self-satisfied smile faltered as all 4 doors locked simultaneously, the sound sharp and final in the enclosed space. He tugged at the door handle reflexively, confusion crossing his face. The custom display screen on the dashboard flickered to life, lines of code scrolling past faster than the eye could follow. Grant's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the car's interior lights pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. The blue glow cast eerie shadows across his increasingly panicked face. "What the hell?" he muttered, jabbing at the door lock. Nothing happened. He tried the windows next, but they remained firmly in place. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he pounded the dashboard with his fist. Then, through the car's speakers came a voice that made Grant's blood run cold. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice that belonged to a man he'd helped put behind bars, a man who had died shortly after his release. The voice was calm, measured, with the same quiet dignity Grant had always resented. "Unauthorized access detected," Marcus Bennett's voice said, calm and clear as if he were sitting right there in the passenger seat. "Activating legacy protocol." The words filled the cabin, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Grant's face, reflected in the rearview mirror, drained of all color as the voice of a dead man filled the car, and the realization of his situation began to sink in. His hands trembled slightly on the wheel as the car continued forward, now seemingly with a purpose of its own. Inside the Mustang, Officer Grant's composure crumbled as he slammed his palm against the steering wheel. The leather-wrapped wheel absorbed the impact without a sound, making his outburst feel small and futile. He yanked the key from the ignition and jammed it back in, twisting it violently. The engine remained silent. "This is Officer Grant requesting immediate backup," he barked into his radio. But instead of the usual crackle of dispatch, he heard only dead air. The radio's display flickered, showing only scrolling lines of code. EOP's interface illuminated the dashboard with a soft blue glow. Text appeared on the screen. "Scanning officer identification." Grant's badge number and department ID appeared, followed by a rapid cascade of database searches. His personnel file materialized, then disappeared, replaced by a growing list of internal affairs investigations. "What is this?" Grant muttered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. He pulled out his phone, but it showed no signal. The car had become a technological cage, systematically stripping away his authority and control. The AI's voice, Marcus Bennett's voice, filled the cabin again. "Accessing sealed records. Multiple instances of misconduct detected. Pattern analysis indicates systematic abuse of authority." Dates and case numbers scrolled past. Complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, wrongful searches. Many had been sealed, buried in administrative paperwork, but EOP pulled them into the light one by one. Grant's face grew paler with each revelation. A small red light began blinking on the dashboard. "Secondary recording protocol initiated," EOP announced. "Livestream active. All interactions now being archived to secure server." Outside on the curb, Zaria's hands had stopped shaking. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers finding Aunt Celeste's number without looking. The call connected on the second ring. Aunt Celeste? Zaria's voice was steady now, focused. I need your help. Officer Grant just took Dad's car. He threw my registration on the ground and drove off with it. Where are you? Celeste's voice was sharp, already in motion. Papers rustled in the background. Are you safe? I'm on Oak Street near the intersection with Madison. I'm okay, but he just... Zaria swallowed hard. He just laughed when he took it. Listen carefully, Celeste said. Start recording everything. Use your phone's video function. Document the scattered registration papers, the location, everything. I'm on my way. Stay exactly where you are. The car security system activated, Zaria added. EOP is running. There was a brief pause on the line. Good, Celeste said finally. Your father knew what he was doing. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Back in the Mustang, Grant's attempts to call for backup grew more desperate. He pressed every button on the radio, but EOP maintained its override. The sealed cabin felt smaller with each passing moment, the air growing thick with tension. The car's speakers crackled and a new recording began to play. It was Marcus's voice again, but different this time, more intimate, as if speaking to someone close by. The sound of tools clinked in the background. You see, baby girl, Marcus's voice said, clearly addressing a younger Zaria. Sometimes the system isn't built to protect everyone equally. Some folks abuse their power because they think their badge makes them untouchable. Grant's jaw clenched as he recognized the date Marcus was discussing. The day of his arrest, the day Grant had planted evidence in another classic car. But the truth always finds a way, Marcus's voice continued. That's why we document everything. That's why we build our own safeguards. Because proof, real, solid proof, that's something they can't ignore forever. The recording continued, a father's lesson to his daughter becoming an indictment of the man now trapped in their car. Grant's hands clenched and unclenched on the steering wheel as Marcus detailed the pattern of harassment that had preceded his arrest. Zaria stood on the curb, her phone steady as she filmed the scattered registration papers, some still soaking in the puddle. She documented the street signs, the time, the exact spot where Grant had ordered her out of the car. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and in the distance she heard the familiar sound of her aunt's car approaching. Celeste's silver sedan pulled up smoothly, and she stepped out already wearing her court heels and carrying her briefcase. Her eyes took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Are you hurt? She asked first, giving Zaria a quick once-over. No, Zaria replied. But look. She pointed down the street where the Mustang sat, Grant visible through the windows, still struggling with the controls. The wail of police sirens cut through the morning air. 2 patrol cars rounded the corner, lights flashing, responding to what they thought was an officer in distress. They pulled up on either side of the Mustang, and 4 officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. He called it in as a suspect trying to escape, Celeste said quietly, her lip curling slightly. Of course he did. One of the officers approached the Mustang's driver's side window. Grant gestured frantically, pointing at the door locks. The officer drew his baton. Keep filming, Celeste instructed Zaria, then raised her voice. Officers, I'm Celeste Bennett, attorney at law. That vehicle contains evidence of multiple civil rights violations, including the wrongful seizure you're witnessing right now. Any damage to that car will be considered tampering with evidence. The officer with the baton hesitated, looking between Grant and Celeste. I've already initiated contact with the department's Internal Affairs Division, Celeste continued, her voice carrying the weight of decades of courtroom experience. Every action you take from this moment forward will be part of their investigation. The baton-wielding officer pulled back slightly, uncertainty clear in his posture. Inside the Mustang, Grant's face had turned from pale to red as he watched his backup hesitate. He mouthed something that looked like "break the window," but his fellow officers remained frozen, suddenly aware of the cameras, both Zaria's phone and the car's own systems, documenting their every move. The morning sun climbed higher as more people gathered around the peculiar scene. Residents emerged from nearby houses, drawn by the flashing police lights and the unusual sight of a classic Mustang surrounded by patrol cars. A group of teenagers, phones already recording, edged closer to capture whatever drama was unfolding. Among the growing crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a fire department t-shirt made his way forward. Darnell had been on his morning walk when he noticed the commotion. His trained eye took in every detail: the young black woman with her phone raised, the distinguished attorney beside her, and the increasingly agitated officer trapped inside the vintage car. Officer Grant's face had turned a deep shade of red as sweat beaded on his forehead. He pounded on the steering wheel, his mouth forming silent curses behind the sealed windows. The pristine interior of the Mustang had become his prison, and the growing audience outside only fueled his rage. "Break the damn thing open!" Grant's muffled shouts carried through the windows. He gestured wildly at his fellow officers, who shifted uncomfortably under the gaze of so many camera phones. "That's an order, break it open now." One of the backup officers, a younger man with nervous energy rolling off him in waves, gripped his baton tighter. He took a hesitant step toward the passenger window, raising the weapon as doubts flickered across his face. Darnell moved then, his movements deliberate and calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black device, his personal body cam, a habit he'd developed after years of witnessing questionable police behavior in his neighborhood. "You do that," Darnell called out, his deep voice carrying across the scene as he activated the camera, "and you're on record destroying evidence." The red recording light blinked steadily, another eye watching the unfolding drama. The young officer's baton wavered in midair. He looked from Darnell to the trapped Grant, then to Celeste, who stood with the confident posture of someone who had fought and won these battles before. Celeste pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "Jerry, it's Celeste Bennett. You're going to want to get a crew down to Oak Street right now. We've got an officer who just illegally seized a vehicle and is now trapped inside it by his own actions. Yes, I'm serious. And Jerry, bring the good camera." Zaria hadn't moved from her spot near the curb. Her arms were folded across her chest, her phone steady as it recorded everything. Her father's necklace caught the morning light. Proof always wins, as she watched Officer Grant's increasing desperation with a composed expression that masked her racing heart. The Mustang's external speakers crackled to life, and Marcus Bennett's voice filled the street. The crowd fell silent, drawn in by the clear, steady tone of a man speaking from beyond. "The first time I was stopped," Marcus's voice began, "I was 16, just walking home from the library. The officer said I looked suspicious. That was the beginning, but it wasn't the end. Over the years, I watched them profile my friends, my family, my community. Each time they said we were suspicious. Each time they found nothing. But they kept coming, kept pushing, kept trying to break our spirit." Grant's face contorted as he recognized his own tactics in Marcus's words. He kicked the door hard, but the solid Detroit steel didn't even shudder. "But we're not suspicious," Marcus's recording continued. "We're not threats. We're human beings asking to be treated with basic dignity. Every time they abuse their power, they leave a mark. Not just on our bodies or our records, but on our souls. That's why we have to stand up. That's why we have to remember. That's why we have to prove what they do." The crowd had grown larger now, people drawing closer to hear the powerful testimony playing through the car's speakers, phones raised higher, capturing every word. In the distance, a news van turned onto the street, its satellite dish visible above the trees. Grant's kicks against the door grew more frantic. "Shut up!" he shouted, but his words couldn't penetrate the sealed cabin. "Turn this thing off!" Instead, EOP's calm interface began to speak, its voice clear and clinical. "Accessing Officer Grant's disciplinary record. Beginning summary." The crowd leaned in. Grant froze mid-kick. "Subject has received 27 civilian complaints in 15 years of service," EOP announced. 11 complaints specifically reference racial bias in stops and searches. 9 mention verbal abuse. 7 cite excessive force. Each number landed like a hammer blow. The backup officers took small steps backward, distancing themselves from their colleague both literally and figuratively. Internal investigations have confirmed misconduct in 13 cases, EOP continued. Disciplinary actions taken: 3 verbal warnings, 2 written reprimands, 1 temporary desk assignment. No criminal charges filed, no suspensions served. Pattern of escalating behavior noted and ignored by supervisors. Grant slumped in the driver's seat, his fury giving way to something that looked like fear as his professional history was laid bare for all to hear. Final analysis, EOP stated, subject has been internally cited for excessive force 7 times. No criminal consequences filed. Complicity noted. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The news crew had their cameras rolling, capturing the moment when years of hidden misconduct finally saw daylight. Celeste turned to Zaria, her eyes bright with the fire of justice long denied but finally within reach. She leaned close to her niece's ear and whispered words that carried the weight of both victory and vindication. "We have everything we need." The morning had stretched into midday when a burst of static came over the police radio. "Clear the scene immediately," a stern voice commanded. "Tech unit en route. Civilian vehicles and observers must disperse." 2 police vans rolled up, their sides marked with Technical Response Unit. Officers in tactical gear emerged, carrying equipment cases and electronic devices. They approached the Mustang with purposeful strides, but Celeste stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife through butter. "I'm invoking legal protection over private digital property," she announced, her tone sharp and authoritative. She held up her phone, displaying an email with the confidence of someone who had spent decades battling in courtrooms. "Judge Martinez is already reviewing our emergency injunction request. Any attempt to forcibly access or override this vehicle's systems will constitute tampering with protected evidence." The tech unit hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances before looking to their superior for guidance. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but remained substantial, with news cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the pavement, making the situation even more uncomfortable for Officer Grant, who sat slumped in the driver's seat, his uniform dark with sweat patches that spread with each passing minute. A sleek, unmarked car pulled up to the scene, tires crunching softly on the asphalt. A man in plain clothes stepped out, Lieutenant Rogers, his badge hanging from a chain around his neck, catching the sunlight as he moved. He surveyed the situation with practiced calm, then approached Zaria with what he probably thought was a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Bennett," he said, keeping his voice low and reasonable, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand the complexity of adult matters. "Let's handle this sensibly. Allow us to unlock the car, and we can address any concerns through proper channels. We'll handle this internally." Celeste's laugh was sharp and without humor, echoing in the tense air. "Like you handled the other complaints against Officer Grant? The ones that conveniently disappeared?" She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a flash drive, holding it up so it caught the light. A small piece of plastic that suddenly seemed to hold enormous power. "This contains every second of footage since he illegally seized my client's vehicle. Every word he's spoken, every action he's taken." Without hesitation, she turned and walked to the nearest news van, where a reporter with perfectly styled hair was doing a live stand-up. She pressed the drive into the woman's hand, their fingers briefly touching in what felt like a passing of responsibility. "Everything you need to know about Officer Grant's history is on here, including his role in Marcus Bennett's case." Inside the Mustang, EOP's external speakers fell silent, but the small red light on the dashboard continued to blink steadily, signaling that the internal live stream was still active, still watching, still recording. Through the windows, they could see Grant's deteriorating state. A dark stain had spread across his uniform pants, and his face was a mask of panic, skin glistening with sweat. His lips moved constantly now, either in prayer or plea, but no one outside could hear the words tumbling from his mouth. Zaria hadn't looked at him once since he'd taken her car. She turned instead to Darnell, who had remained nearby, a steady presence in the chaos, his body cam still recording. "Would you be willing to share your footage?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "In case they try to dispute what happened here?" Darnell nodded, pulling out his phone to exchange contact information with her. His fingers moved with purpose across the screen. "Truth is," he said, his voice low and heavy with old pain that seemed to weigh down his shoulders, "I've been waiting for something like this. Grant pulled over my nephew Marcus, no relation to your father, about a year ago. Roughed him up pretty bad. We filed a complaint, but—" He shrugged, the gesture containing years of familiar disappointment, a story told in a single movement. "Nothing came of it," Zarya finished for him. She'd heard this story too many times before, had seen it play out in communities across the country. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute feeling stretched and taut. The crowd ebbed and flowed like an uncertain tide, but a core group remained, witnessing what felt like a shifting of power. News crews rotated in and out, keeping their cameras trained on the Mustang, hungry for any development. Grant's fellow officers looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot, especially when EOP had broadcast his disciplinary record for all to hear. Finally, at around 2 in the afternoon, Celeste's phone buzzed. She read the message, a smile of satisfaction spreading across her face, transforming her features. "The injunction has been granted," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, her voice carrying pride and victory. "Federal Marshal Davis is en route to supervise the vehicle's transfer to a neutral evidence facility." Within 20 minutes, a federal marshal's car arrived, followed by a specialized tow truck with hydraulic equipment. Marshal Davis, a stern-faced woman in a dark suit with perfectly pressed creases, took control of the scene with brisk efficiency that brooked no argument. "The vehicle will be transported to the federal evidence lockup on Harrison Street," she declared, showing her paperwork to the lieutenant with a flick of her wrist. "Officer Grant will be removed from the vehicle and taken into custody pending investigation." EOP responded to the marshal's credentials, unlocking the doors with a soft click that somehow sounded like justice. 2 deputies approached the driver's side, and Grant practically fell into their arms, his uniform soiled and his face streaked with tears that left clean tracks down his dirty cheeks. His legs barely seemed to work as they helped him stand, like a man who had aged decades in hours. "Please," he sobbed as they fitted handcuffs around his wrists, the metal catching the afternoon light. "Please, you don't understand. I was just doing my job. I was just—" "Save it for internal affairs," Marshal Davis cut him off, nodding to her deputies to place him in their vehicle, her face impassive as stone. As the patrol car carrying Grant pulled away, Zarya watched it disappear around the corner, the red taillights fading from view. Her father's words echoed in her mind, from all those hours they'd spent working on the Mustang together, his patient hands guiding hers on tools that once felt too big for her grip. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she said, "That's the first bolt unscrewed." The evening sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Zarya and Celeste pulled up to the modest 2-story house they called home. The day's events had left them both physically and emotionally drained. Zarya's mother waited on the front porch, wringing her hands with nervous energy until she saw them emerge from Celeste's car. "Thank God you're both okay," she said, wrapping Zarya in a tight hug before turning to embrace her sister-in-law. "I've been watching the news all day." Zarya managed a tired smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just need to grab my overnight bag from the trunk. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." The Mustang sat in their driveway, its metallic paint gleaming in the fading light. After the federal marshal had verified the chain of custody, she'd allowed Zarya to drive it home under supervision. The car seemed different now, not just her father's legacy, but something more. Zarya pressed the trunk release button and the lid popped up with a gentle click. She reached for her overnight bag, but something caught her eye. A slight irregularity in the trunk's rear panel lining. In all the hours she'd spent restoring the car with her father, she'd never noticed it before. Her fingers found a small tear in the fabric, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Carefully, she pulled at the edge, and the entire panel came loose, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. There, wrapped carefully in clear plastic, was a worn leather folder. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the label written in her father's neat handwriting. Case Notes, MB. "Aunt Celeste," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you need to see this." Celeste appeared at her side, her eyes widening as Zaria carefully removed the folder from its hiding place. They carried it inside to the kitchen table, where Zaria's mother had already started brewing a pot of coffee. They all sensed this would be a long night. With trembling fingers, Zaria unwrapped the plastic. The folder's leather was soft with age, its edges worn smooth from handling. As she opened it, papers spilled out across the table. Yellowed pages covered in her father's distinctive handwriting, photocopied court transcripts with sections highlighted in fading yellow, detailed diagrams of various cars with dates and locations noted in the margins. "Look at this," Celeste said, picking up a sheet filled with badge numbers and dates. "These are all officers involved in auto theft cases between 2005 and 2010. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the list. "Some of these names, I've seen them before, in cases I tried to bring forward over the years." Zaria's mother sat down heavily in a chair. Marcus never stopped investigating even after... Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. But it was what lay at the bottom of the folder that made Zaria's breath catch in her throat. A photograph, its colors slightly faded but still clear, showed a younger Officer Grant and another man, his partner at the time, standing proudly next to a black sedan. The caption read, "Recovered stolen vehicle," with a date and timestamp. Celeste leaned in closer, her legal mind already connecting the dots. That timestamp. "Zaria, this photo was taken 3 days before your father was arrested. The car he was accused of stealing was already in police possession," Zaria finished, her voice tight with anger and realization. "They had it the whole time. They planted the evidence." Her aunt was already pulling out her phone, taking pictures of every document. "This is why those cases kept getting shut down," she muttered, more to herself than the others. "Every time I tried to file a lawsuit against the department, it would get settled quietly, or dismissed on technicalities. They were protecting a whole network, not just individual officers." Zaria spread the documents across the table, trying to make sense of her father's investigation. His notes were meticulous. Dates, times, locations, all carefully documented. He'd been building a case, piece by piece, even as the system worked to destroy him. "Why didn't he use this evidence?" Zaria's mother asked, picking up the photograph with trembling hands. "Because he couldn't," Celeste replied, her voice heavy with understanding. "From inside the system, with no credibility left, no one would have listened. They would have buried it, and him, even deeper." She paused, looking at Zaria. "But he made sure someone would find it when the time was right." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of papers. Each document they examined revealed another layer of corruption, another connection in a web of injustice that had ensnared not just Marcus Bennett, but countless others. Hours later, when her mother and aunt had finally gone to bed, Zaria retreated to her room. She sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by her father's carefully gathered evidence. On her nightstand stood the photo of him that she treasured most, taken in the garage, his sleeves rolled up, teaching her how to change a spark plug. The STEM conference badge lay untouched beside her, a reminder of the day that had started so differently than planned. She picked up the photograph of her father, tracing his smile with her finger. "We're gonna finish what you started, Dad," she whispered to the image, her voice thick with determination and unshed tears. The leather folder lay open beside her conference badge, its contents spreading across her bedspread like pieces of a puzzle her father had spent years assembling, a puzzle that was finally ready to be solved. The morning air hung heavy with dew as Zaria and Celeste made their way up the courthouse steps. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the stone building in shades of pale gold. Celeste clutched her briefcase containing 2 hard drives, one with the Mustang footage that had captured Officer Grant's misconduct, and another containing Marcus's meticulously gathered evidence. Zaria walked beside her aunt, her father's leather folder tucked securely under her arm. She'd spent half the night reviewing every document, every notation, every carefully preserved piece of evidence her father had collected. Her eyes were tired, but her spirit was resolute. The courthouse was quiet at this early hour, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. A few early morning staff members hurried past, carrying coffee cups and files, while security guards nodded at Celeste, a familiar face in these halls. At the clerk's window, Celeste straightened her jacket and presented her credentials. "I'm filing a motion to unseal the criminal case of Marcus Bennett, along with an appeal for judicial review based on newly discovered evidence." Her voice was clear and professional, but Zaria could hear the underlying tension. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, paused at the name. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard as recognition flickered across her face. "Bennett?" she asked, glancing between Celeste and Zaria. "The auto theft case from—" "Yes," Celeste cut in firmly. "That Bennett case, and this time we have evidence that was deliberately withheld during the original trial." The clerk's hesitation was visible, her eyes darting to a senior colleague's office door. But procedure was procedure, and after a moment, she began processing the request, her fingers clicking steadily on the keyboard. While Celeste handled the paperwork, Zaria's phone buzzed with an email. The sender line made her stomach clench. Black Girls in STEM Conference Committee. She stepped away from the counter to read it privately. The message was carefully worded, full of corporate phrases like "unfortunate incident" and "maintaining professional standards." But the meaning was clear. She was being placed on temporary suspension from the mentorship program, pending a review of what they termed disruptive conduct. Zaria felt the sting of tears but blinked them back. The conference she'd worked so hard to be part of, the opportunity to inspire other young women like herself, all put on hold because she dared to stand up against injustice. She wasn't surprised, but it hurt nonetheless. Later that afternoon, back in the quiet of their home, Zaria spread the folder's contents across her desk for what felt like the 100th time. As she lifted a stack of papers, something small and black clattered onto the wooden surface, a USB drive she hadn't noticed before, labeled simply Legacy Protocol V2 in her father's handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she plugged it into her laptop. A single video file appeared, encrypted with a password. She tried her father's birthday, then her own, before finally entering the date he was wrongfully arrested. The file opened. Marcus Bennett's face filled the screen, looking younger but worn, his eyes carrying the weight of knowledge he couldn't yet share. He must have recorded this just before his arrest. Zaria called out for Celeste, who quickly joined her. "Zaria," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "If you're watching this, then you've found the evidence I've been collecting. And more importantly, they've already made their first move against you." He leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense. "Baby girl, I need you to understand something. They won't come for you once. They'll come twice, harder. The first time is to test you, to see if you'll break. The second time," he shook his head, "the second time is to bury you." Zaria felt Celeste's hand grip her shoulder as they continued watching. Marcus explained how he'd discovered the corruption, how it went beyond just a few bad officers to include judges, clerks, and administrators. He detailed the patterns he'd noticed, the way evidence disappeared, how cases got buried. "But you've got something I never had," Marcus continued, a slight smile touching his lips. "You've got preparation, you've got proof, and most importantly, you've got people in your corner who know how to fight the right way." The video continued, Marcus providing additional context to his notes, explaining connections that might not be obvious at first glance. Finally, he sat back, his expression both proud and concerned. "If you're watching this, they've already made their move," he said, his voice growing softer but no less determined. "Now you make yours." The video ended, freezing on Marcus's face. Zaria stared at the screen for a long moment before turning to her aunt. Her voice was steady, carrying all the strength and determination her father had passed down to her. "We sue them," she said. "All of them." The morning sun had barely touched Zaria's window when her phone started buzzing incessantly. She reached for it, still groggy from a restless night spent thinking about her father's video message. The screen showed an overwhelming flood of notifications. Missed calls, text messages, social media alerts, and emails, all demanding her immediate attention. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Her hands trembled as she opened the first message, sent by a former classmate. "Is this really you? This doesn't seem like you at all." Attached was a link to a video that had already garnered thousands of views. Zaria's stomach dropped as she watched the footage. There she was, or rather, a manipulated version of her, screaming and gesturing wildly at police officers during what appeared to be the Mustang incident. The video showed her throwing punches at the air, her face contorted with rage, spewing threats and profanities. But none of it had happened. Not like this. She recognized fragments of the source material, a protest she'd attended last year against police brutality, where she'd stood quietly holding a sign. Someone had taken that footage and skillfully warped it, transforming her composed demeanor into something unrecognizable and threatening. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from her school's administration. "Dear Ms. Bennett, we have received numerous concerns from our valued donors regarding your recent conduct. In light of the circulating video footage and the serious nature of these allegations, we are initiating an immediate conduct review. Please make yourself available." Zaria couldn't read further. Her vision blurred with tears of frustration. Another notification popped up. The STEM mentorship program had deactivated her account, pending investigation of concerning behavior. She called Celeste immediately, her voice shaking. "Aunt Celeste, they're trying to destroy everything. There's this video." "I know, baby." Celeste's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "I'm already on it. Don't respond to anyone. Don't post anything. Let me handle this." Celeste worked her network with precision, calling in favors from digital forensics experts she'd worked with on previous cases. Within hours, she had traced the video's origin to a company called Silversight Incorporated, a digital marketing firm that specialized in reputation management and narrative control. "Look at this," Celeste said, spreading documents across Zaria's kitchen table. Silversight has no direct connection to the police department on paper, but they've been awarded multiple contracts for internal surveillance systems and digital security solutions with the precinct, the same precinct that employed Officer Grant. Zaria watched as her aunt made call after call, her voice never losing its professional edge even as her anger simmered beneath the surface. Finally, Celeste reached a journalist she trusted, someone who had covered police misconduct cases before and understood the stakes. "I'm sending you irrefutable proof that this video has been doctored," Celeste told the reporter. "I've got the original footage, metadata analysis, and documentation linking Silversight to the department. This isn't just character assassination, it's institutional retaliation against a witness in an active investigation." While Celeste worked, Zaria sat at her desk, unable to look away from her laptop screen as the comments continued to pour in. Some were supportive, from people who recognized the manipulation for what it was. But others, entitled criminal in a stolen car just like her dad. The words hit her like a physical blow. Zaria slammed her laptop shut, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "They're still trying to erase him," she whispered, touching the necklace her father had given her. "And now me." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of history repeating itself. Just as her father had predicted in his video message, they had come for her again, harder this time, trying to destroy not just her freedom but her very credibility. Celeste entered the room, her phone still in hand but now lowered. She saw the tears in Zaria's eyes and moved quickly to her niece's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. The gesture was reminiscent of how she'd supported Zaria through her father's trial, through every setback and struggle that followed. "They think they can bury the truth under lies," Celeste said, her voice firm. "But they forgot something important. We've got receipts. And unlike your father's case, this time we've got people watching. This time we're ready for their playbook." Zaria nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The pain was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. The same determination that had driven her to rebuild the Mustang, to carry on her father's legacy, to fight for justice in her own way. They might try to erase her, But like her father before her, she would not go quietly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the brick buildings as Zarya made her way to Fire Station 27. The old firehouse stood quietly between a corner store and an apartment complex, its red doors worn but well-maintained. She double-checked the address Darnell had texted her before climbing the short steps to the side entrance. Her knuckles had barely touched the door when it opened. Darnell stood there in his navy uniform shirt, his expression warm but cautious. "Ms. Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Just Zarya, please," she replied, shaking his hand. "And thank you for agreeing to meet." He led her through a corridor lined with framed photos of firefighters past and present. The station was peaceful at this hour. Most of the crew was out on a call, leaving them alone in the break room. Coffee mugs sat half-empty on the table, and a TV mounted in the corner played the news on mute. "Can I get you something to drink?" Darnell asked, gesturing to a chair. "No, thank you." Zarya sat down, placing her father's folder on the table. "I wanted to ask you something important. Would you be willing to testify about what happened with Officer Grant?" Darnell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a locked cabinet in the corner and pulled out a worn leather binder. "Before I answer that, there's something you should see." He sat across from her and opened the binder carefully like someone handling precious evidence. "First, here's my body cam footage from that day." He placed a small memory card on the table. But that's just the beginning. One by one, he laid out 4 manila folders, each labeled with dates and case numbers. These are complaints filed against Officer Grant, all involving young black men in our community, all dismissed without proper investigation. Zarya's hands trembled slightly as she opened the first folder. Inside was a photo of a young man, barely out of his teens, with a bright smile and graduation cap. "This is your nephew?" "Marcus Johnson," Darnell confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Honor student, had a full ride waiting for him at Howard University. Grant stopped him 3 blocks from here, claimed he was acting suspicious. Held him for 4 hours while they processed him." "What was he actually doing?" Zarya asked, though she already knew the answer. "Walking home from the library. He missed his scholarship interview that day. The university tried to reschedule, but..." Darnell shook his head. By then, the spot had gone to someone else. He's working at the auto parts store now, trying to save up for community college. He opened another folder. 2 months after that, same thing happened to James Torres, then Michael Webb, then Darren Fisher. Different excuses each time, same pattern. Zarya studied the documents, her heart heavy with recognition. The language in the reports was familiar, the same kind of vague justifications used to arrest her father. Acting suspicious, matched a description, appeared confrontational. "But wait," Darnell said, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a flash drive, small and unmarked. "This is what really connects the dots." "What's on it?" "Precinct meeting minutes going back 5 years. He placed it carefully on the table. "I do maintenance work for the station sometimes. HVAC systems, electrical. Nobody pays attention to the guy fixing the air conditioning. I started downloading files whenever I could after what happened to Marcus." Zarya picked up the drive, turning it over in her hands. "And what did you find?" "They knew about Grant's behavior. There's a pattern of moving him around whenever the complaints piled up. They'd transfer him to what they called low-conflict zones, meaning wealthy, mostly white neighborhoods. Let things cool down, then move him back." The revelation hit Zarya hard. It wasn't just one corrupt officer. It was an entire system protecting him, hiding evidence, shuffling problems around instead of solving them. "Why did you keep all this?" she asked quietly. "It must have been risky." Darnell's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Because I knew I'd need it when someone brave enough showed up." He gestured to the folders spread between them. "Someone who wouldn't just file another complaint to be ignored, someone who'd make them face what they've done." The weight of his words settled over them both. Zarya thought about her father, about Marcus Johnson, about all the others whose lives had been derailed by this pattern of abuse. She carefully gathered the folders and the flash drive, placing them in her bag. I'll testify, Darnell said firmly. Whatever you need. It's time these records saw daylight. Zaria stood overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, this means… I know, he nodded. Just be careful. They're not going to like what we're doing. She walked toward the exit, Darnell accompanying her to the door. The late afternoon light had grown dimmer, casting long shadows across the street. As she stepped outside, a dark police SUV cruised slowly past the firehouse. The driver turned his head deliberately toward them, making eye contact through mirrored sunglasses. The message was clear. They were being watched. The SUV continued down the street, unhurried, before turning the corner. Zaria looked back at Darnell, who stood in the doorway. He nodded grimly. They're watching now. The morning sun glinted off the courthouse's marble columns as Zaria and Celeste climbed the wide steps. Their footsteps echoed against stone, joining the growing chorus of voices ahead. A crowd had gathered, divided like a fault line down the middle of the entrance plaza. On one side, supporters held signs reading, "Justice for Marcus Bennett" and "End Police Corruption." On the other, counter-protesters waved thin blue-line flags and shouted about law and order. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes reaching toward the cloudless sky. Zaria's heart pounded, but her face remained composed. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her father's favorite color, and the necklace he'd given her. Proof always wins. Celeste walked beside her, briefcase in hand, her expression fierce and focused. Behind them, their legal team carried boxes of evidence and laptops. "Remember," Celeste whispered as they approached the metal detectors, "let them see your strength, not your fear." The security check seemed to take forever. Each document was scrutinized, each device examined. Finally, they made their way to courtroom 4B. The heavy wooden doors opened to reveal high ceilings, dark panels, and rows of wooden benches already filling with spectators. At the defense table, the police department's lawyers sat in expensive suits, shuffling papers with artificial confidence. Officer Grant was notably absent, still suspended pending investigation. His empty chair spoke volumes. Judge Marion Waters entered, her silver hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the room rustled to attention. "Be seated," Judge Waters said, adjusting her microphone. "We're here today regarding case number 2023 CV4891, Bennett versus Metropolitan Police Department, a motion to reopen the criminal case of Marcus Bennett based on newly discovered evidence. Ms. Bennett, you may proceed." Celeste rose smoothly, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Thank you, Your Honor. What we present today isn't just about one case. It's about a pattern of systemic abuse that spans decades. We begin with Exhibit A." She projected the photograph onto the courtroom screen, Officer Grant and his former partner, smiling beside a car identical to the one Marcus had been accused of stealing. The timestamp was clear. "This photo proves the vehicle in question was already in police possession before my client's brother was arrested," Celeste stated. "The department claimed Marcus Bennett stole this car on October 15, 2010. This photo is dated October 12, 2010. Simple mathematics tells us something is very wrong here." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The defense lawyers shifted uncomfortably. "Furthermore," Celeste continued, "we have Marcus Bennett's own documentation." She held up the worn leather folder. "Notes, diagrams, and timestamps that correspond perfectly with maintenance records from his legitimate auto repair business. But most importantly, we have new evidence of ongoing misconduct by the same officer." The courtroom screen filled with footage from inside the Mustang, Officer Grant's recent abuse of power captured in crystal clear detail. His voice rang out, "There's no way you can afford this car." The gallery watched as he ignored Zaria's registration, took her keys, and attempted to steal her vehicle. "This isn't isolated," Celeste declared. "We have testimony from Darnell Washington, a respected firefighter, documenting similar incidents. We have precinct meeting minutes showing systematic cover-ups. And when exposure seemed imminent, we have this." She played the doctored video that had smeared Zaria online, then split the screen to show the original footage. Our technical experts traced this falsified content to Silversight Incorporated, a company that holds multiple contracts with the police department for digital services. The defense lawyer shot to his feet. Objection! This is speculation about unrelated matters. Is it? Celeste countered. We have the contracts right here. We have the metadata trail. We have proof of payment from a shell company linked to the police union. This isn't speculation. It's a documented attempt to discredit a witness using department resources. Judge Waters leaned forward, her expression grave. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Bennett. For the next hour, Celeste methodically connected the dots between Marcus's case and the present. She showed how Grant's pattern of targeting black citizens had been hidden through departmental transfers. She presented statistics on wrongful arrests in minority neighborhoods. She laid bare the machinery of institutional racism, piece by damning piece. The defense tried to interrupt with procedural objections, attempted to paint Zaria as an attention seeker, even suggested the AI system in her car was illegal. But Celeste had anticipated every attack. She produced permits, certificates, and character witnesses. She turned their own arguments against them, exposing the desperate flailing of a system trying to protect itself. Finally, Judge Waters raised her hand. The courtroom fell silent. In my 30 years on the bench, she began, removing her glasses slowly, I have seen many troubling cases. But what you've presented today. She paused, choosing her words carefully. These are some of the most alarming preliminary findings I've seen in decades. This court will take a recess to review all submitted evidence. We will reconvene in 1 week. She banged her gavel, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. As people began filing out, the noise from outside grew louder. Zaria gathered her belongings, her hands steady despite the emotion churning inside her. Celeste squeezed her shoulder gently. They walked toward the courthouse exit together, flanked by their legal team. The heavy doors opened to a wall of sound, cheers and jeers mixing in the afternoon air. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. A man near the front of the crowd, red-faced and angry, pushed forward. "Why don't you people just move on?" he yelled, spittle flying from his lips. Zaria stopped. The cameras swung toward her. In that moment, she felt her father's presence, in the necklace against her throat, in the strength flowing through her veins. She turned to face the cameras, her voice clear and calm. "You made us carry this, now we're unloading it." The morning light filtered through City Hall's towering windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as Celeste and Zaria made their way to the top floor. A security guard with a crisp uniform and an earpiece led them through a maze of corridors, past oil paintings of stern-faced former mayors and polished wooden doors with brass nameplates. "You didn't have to come," Celeste whispered to her niece, though her eyes showed pride rather than concern. "Yes, I did," Zaria replied simply, straightening the collar of her navy blazer. She wore Marcus's necklace outside her shirt today, the words, "Proof always wins," catching the light. The guard stopped at a heavy oak door marked Conference Room A. He scanned his key card, and the lock clicked open with a soft beep. Inside, the room felt expensive, all dark wood and leather chairs, with a view of the city sprawling below through floor-to-ceiling windows. Deputy Mayor Richardson sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit probably worth more than Zaria's car. To his right was Sandra Chen, the senior city attorney, her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Police Commissioner Wallace occupied the other end of the table, his bulk filling the leather chair, his face carefully neutral. "Ms. Bennett," Richardson began, then paused when he noticed Zaria. "I wasn't aware this would be a family meeting." "Where I go, she goes," Celeste said firmly, taking a seat. Zaria sat beside her, back straight, hands folded on the table. Richardson cleared his throat. "Very well. We've reviewed the preliminary evidence presented in court, and the city would like to propose an amicable resolution." Sandra Chen opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. "We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement. The exact figure is on page 3, but I think you'll find it quite generous." Celeste didn't even touch the paper. "And?" The agreement includes a standard non-disclosure clause and no admission of wrongdoing by the department or any individual officers, Commissioner Wallace added, his voice gravelly. Celeste let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. You really don't get it, do you? Ms. Bennett, Richardson leaned forward, his tone patronizing. This offer would set your niece up for life. No more legal battles, no more public scrutiny. Everyone wins. Zaria, who had been silent until now, looked directly at Wallace. And what about my father's name? The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Richardson and Chen exchanged glances. The settlement agreement doesn't address previous cases, Chen said carefully. Those records would remain as they are. Zaria reached into her bag and pulled out a small black flash drive. It made barely a sound as she placed it on the polished table, but everyone stared at it like it was a live grenade. This contains every sealed case Officer Grant ever touched, she said, her voice steady. Every complaint, every incident report, every internal review. If I go down, this goes public. Wallace's face drained of color. That's confidential police information. How did you… Does it matter? Celeste cut in. What matters is that it exists, and I'm sure the media would love to know why an officer with Grant's record was still allowed to patrol minority neighborhoods. Wallace's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging. Turn off the recording, he said to Chen, who reached over and pressed a button on a small device near the centerpiece. Off record, Wallace continued, rubbing his face with one meaty hand. Marcus Bennett's conviction was complicated. Grant had already caused problems, but admitting he planted evidence would have opened up dozens of other cases. The department couldn't afford that kind of scrutiny back then. So you sacrificed my father to protect departmental integrity? Zaria's voice was ice. Grant was supposed to be confined to desk duty after that, Wallace admitted. He was never meant to be back on patrol. Someone dropped the ball. Someone always drops the ball, Celeste said, and black families always pay the price. Richardson tried to regain control of the meeting. What exactly are you asking for? Celeste sat forward. Full retraction of Marcus Bennett's conviction, complete reopening of the case with all new evidence admitted, formal misconduct review of Grant's entire unit going back 15 years, and a public apology from the department. That's impossible, Chen protested. The liability alone is nothing compared to what you'll face if this goes public, Celeste finished. One man's life was stolen. His daughter was targeted. How many others are out there? How many families destroyed? Do you really want those numbers in the headlines? The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Wallace stared at his hands. Richardson looked out the window at his city. Chen frantically scribbled notes. Finally, Wallace spoke. I'll need time to discuss this with the union and the oversight committee. You have 48 hours, Celeste said, standing. Zaria rose beside her, leaving the flash drive on the table like a gauntlet thrown. As they walked out, Richardson called after them. This could destroy careers, reputations, lives. Zaria turned in the doorway. It already has. Later that night, in her bedroom, Zaria sat at her desk. Her laptop's camera light blinked red as she recorded, speaking softly but clearly. I need to say this while I still can, she began. I never wanted to be a symbol. I never wanted to be a hashtag or a headline or a cause. I just wanted my father to rest with his name intact. She touched the necklace at her throat. Dad always said proof wins in the end. He taught me to build things, fix things, make things better. But sometimes you have to tear down before you can rebuild. Sometimes justice looks like destruction to those who profited from injustice. She leaned closer to the camera. If you're seeing this, it means I'm gone. Arrested, disappeared, silenced somehow. But the truth doesn't disappear. The proof doesn't vanish. Everything I found is backed up in places they'll never reach. Zaria's finger hovered over the upload button. After a moment's hesitation, she clicked it, watching as the video processed and stored itself in a secure cloud server, set to release automatically if she didn't enter a code every 24 hours. The screen faded to black, reflecting her face in the darkness. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Zaria's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She blinked away sleep, reaching for it with a clumsy hand. Celeste's name flashed on the screen, causing her heart to quicken. "Hello?" Zaria's voice was still rough with sleep, her mind foggy with dreams that quickly dissolved. "It's official." Celeste's words crackled through the speaker, charged with electricity. The judge just approved a motion to unseal Marcus's case files. Her aunt's voice held a rare tremor of excitement that cut through her usual measured tone. Zaria sat up straight in bed, suddenly wide awake. Her eyes drifted to the framed photo on her desk, her father's gentle smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his work-worn hands resting on the hood of the Mustang. The photo had been her silent companion through countless nights of doubt and determination. "We're cracking it open, Dad," she whispered, touching the glass of the frame with trembling fingers. The cool surface grounded her as emotions swirled inside her chest. 2 hours later, Zaria sat beside Celeste in the familiar wooden pews of courtroom 3B. The space felt different today, lighter somehow despite the heavy oak panels and musty law books lining the walls. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the floor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Judge Martinez settled into her chair, her black robes rustling as she arranged the files before her. The courtroom fell silent, save for the soft whir of the ceiling fans and the occasional cough from the gallery. Tension hung in the air, thick enough to touch. "In the matter of Bennett versus the state," Judge Martinez began, her voice clear and measured, "I have reviewed the sealed documents from the original trial of Marcus Bennett, case number 2009 CR 4721. Her words carried weight, each syllable deliberate and precise. She lifted the first document, adjusting her reading glasses that perched on her nose. "Let the record show that of the 3 supposed witnesses listed in the original complaint, none appeared at trial. Not one." She looked up, her gaze sweeping the courtroom like a searchlight. "In fact, when my clerk attempted to locate these witnesses for this review, we found no record of them ever existing at the addresses provided." A murmur rippled through the gallery like a stone dropped in still water. Celeste squeezed Zaria's hand, her fingers warm and steady against Zaria's cold ones. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her tone hardening, "all physical evidence in the case was processed and filed solely under the authority of Officer James Grant and his then-partner, Officer Michael Torres. Both officers have since been implicated in multiple instances of misconduct and evidence tampering." She held up the photograph that had been hidden in the Mustang, the one showing Grant and Torres posing with the supposedly stolen vehicle. "This photograph, recently discovered, proves that the vehicle Mr. Bennett was accused of stealing was already in police possession before his arrest. The timestamp and location data are irrefutable." The image seemed to glow in her hands, a beacon of truth in a sea of lies. Zaria's throat tightened. She could picture her father meticulously gathering this evidence, carefully preserving it, knowing he couldn't use it from inside the system that had trapped him. His patience and foresight stretched across time to this moment, a final gift from father to daughter. Judge Martinez's voice took on an edge of controlled anger as she continued. "But perhaps most disturbing is what our review uncovered about the prosecution itself. Assistant District Attorney James Whitman, who led the case against Mr. Bennett, accepted a position as legal advisor to the police union less than 6 months after securing this conviction, a clear conflict of interest that was never disclosed." She set down her papers and removed her glasses, looking directly at Zaria with eyes that held both compassion and righteous indignation. This case was not only mishandled, it was manufactured. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every procedural step was corrupted by either incompetence or deliberate misconduct. Likely both. The judge straightened in her chair, her shoulders squaring with resolve. "Therefore, pursuant to Section 440.10 of the Criminal Procedure Law, I hereby order Marcus Bennett's conviction vacated in its entirety. The record will reflect that he was wrongfully convicted, based on falsified evidence and prosecutorial misconduct." The gavel cracked against wood, the sound echoing off the high ceiling like a thunderclap of justice. So ordered. The gallery erupted in cheers and applause. Celeste wrapped her arms around Zarya, who sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face like silent rain. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The reporters rushing for the doors, the lawyers gathering their papers, the activists hugging each other in celebration. The world blurred around her, sounds muffled as if she were underwater. Zarya walked out of the courtroom in a daze, barely registering the chaos around her. Television cameras flashed like lightning. Protesters on the courthouse steps waved signs and chanted, their voices rising and falling like waves. Reporters thrust microphones toward her face, their questions blending into a meaningless roar. She didn't speak. Instead, she moved through the crowd until she reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. There, she knelt down, one hand pressed against the cool stone, and whispered words meant only for one person, words that traveled beyond the physical world. "Your name is clean now." The words felt both massive and inadequate, like trying to capture an ocean in a teacup. They couldn't bring back the years lost, couldn't erase the pain, couldn't undo the damage done. But they were true, and truth had been her father's North Star all along, guiding him even through his darkest nights. Proof always wins, his necklace had promised. Today, finally, it had. The system that had broken her father had been forced to acknowledge its own corruption, and in that acknowledgement lay a victory that transcended even death itself. The evening air was heavy with purpose as Zarya and Celeste entered the community center's meeting room. 3 families waited inside, their faces etched with a familiar pain that Zarya recognized all too well. Plastic chairs scraped against linoleum as everyone settled around a worn wooden table. Mrs. Johnson, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair, spoke first. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a hospital document. "My Tommy. He was 16 when Grant's unit picked him up. Said he matched the description of a car thief." She pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. "They held him for 28 hours. No phone call. No lawyer. Just kept saying he'd confess eventually." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Mrs. Johnson continued. "When they finally let him go, something in him was broken. 2 months later, I found him." Her voice cracked. "Found him in the bathroom, pills. The note said he couldn't handle being seen as a criminal everywhere he went." Zarya reached across the table, covering Mrs. Johnson's shaking hands with her own. Tommy had survived, but the scars remained, both physical and invisible. Next to Mrs. Johnson, Marcus Williams Sr. pulled out a thick manila envelope. "My boy got the same treatment, but they offered us this." He slid a document across the table. Celeste picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she read. "A settlement agreement," Celeste said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "With a non-disclosure clause. $15,000 to keep quiet," Mr. William Street said if we didn't take it, they'd make sure Marcus Jr. never got into college with a record. The third family, the Robertsons, had a similar story. Their daughter had been a passenger in a suspicious vehicle that Grant's unit had targeted. The trauma had forced her to drop out of her engineering program. Zarya stood up, walking to the whiteboard mounted on the wall. She uncapped a marker, its sharp chemical smell cutting through the heavy air. "What happened to us wasn't random," she said, drawing a circle in the center. "It was systematic, calculated." She wrote Grant in the circle, then began drawing lines outward. "The department protected him," she continued, adding another circle. "Silversite helped cover it up." Another circle. The city looked the other way. A final circle completed the diagram. She turned to face the families. "We can't just go after Grant. We need to expose the entire machine." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm proposing we build something bigger than a lawsuit. Something that fights back with education, technology, and legal power all at once." Celeste leaned forward, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Project EOP." "Yes." Zarya drew a new diagram. "But not as a non-profit. As a full infrastructure of resistance. We teach kids AI programming, legal defense strategies, automotive engineering. Everything they need to protect themselves and their communities." The door opened and Darnell stepped in, still in his firefighter uniform from his shift. "Count me in," he said, pulling up a chair. "The old firehouse has a workshop space we never use. It's yours if you want it." Zaria's phone buzzed. A message popped up from Maya Chen, one of the STEM mentorship coordinators who had been suspended for supporting her. "Maya's offering to build the digital platform," Zaria announced. "She's been coding resistance tools in secret since they suspended her." Mr. Williams spread out a stack of old newspapers on the table. "I've been collecting articles about Grant's unit for years," he said. "Every traffic stop, every search, every arrest." Mrs. Johnson pulled out her phone. "I have a whole network of mothers whose kids were targeted. We've been documenting everything." The energy in the room shifted from grief to determination as they began piecing together the timeline. Celeste's legal pad filled with names, dates, and case numbers. The Robertsons had photographs of Grant's unit conducting illegal searches. Mr. Williams had precinct meeting minutes showing pattern after pattern of targeted harassment. 15 years, Celeste muttered, staring at the growing web of evidence. "They've been doing this for 15 years. As midnight approached, the families left with new purpose, armed with tasks and timelines. Celeste headed home to start drafting the class action paperwork. Darnell went to prep the firehouse workshop. Zaria drove home alone, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. In her garage, she stood before her father's old tool chest, a heavy red metal box she hadn't opened since his death. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the lid. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal hit her first. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, wrenches arranged by size, screwdrivers sorted by type, each socket in its labeled place. But there, tucked between two trays, was a small white envelope she'd never seen before. Written in her father's neat mechanic's handwriting were the words, "For Z, when you're ready to build something new." She opened it carefully, pulling out several sheets of graph paper covered in detailed technical drawings. They showed a hybrid electric engine design for a Mustang, with notes about sustainable power and enhanced performance scribbled in the margins. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she studied the drawings, but she was smiling. "Let's build, Dad." The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse's high windows as people packed into every available space. The police tribunal for Officer Grant had drawn hundreds, protesters with handmade signs pressed against the building's stone facade, reporters clutching notepads and microphones, and activists wearing shirts emblazoned with "Justice for Marcus Bennett." Inside the courtroom, Zaria sat perfectly still in the front row, her father's necklace catching the light. The engraved words, "Proof always wins," seemed to pulse against her collarbone. Her fingers traced the edge of the pendant as she watched Grant being sworn in, his once crisp uniform now wrinkled and ill-fitting after months of administrative leave. Celeste stood at the prosecution table, arranging documents with methodical precision. She'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, building a case that would expose not just Grant's actions, but the entire system that had protected him. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and alert eyes, called the tribunal to order. The room fell silent, except for the soft whir of camera shutters. Grant took the stand, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. But Zaria noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his collar, the first crack in his facade. "Officer Grant," the prosecutor began, "please explain your actions on the morning of April 15th when you encountered Ms. Bennett's vehicle." Grant cleared his throat. "I observed a suspicious vehicle in an area known for auto theft. Given the make and model, I had reasonable cause to investigate." "A restored 1969 Mustang," the prosecutor clarified, "with current registration and proof of ownership readily available. Did you check those documents when Ms. Bennett offered them?" "I was following standard protocol for—" "Yes or no, Officer Grant?" Grant's jaw tightened. "No." The prosecutor nodded to a technician who pulled up the AI footage from EOP on the courtroom screens. The video showed Grant approaching Zaria's window, his body language aggressive from the start. When the footage reached the moment he slapped her registration papers away, several people in the gallery gasped. "Standard protocol, Officer Grant?" The prosecutor's voice was razor-sharp. Grant shifted in his seat. The situation was escalating. By whose actions? The prosecutor cut him off again, then turned to address the tribunal panel. Let's examine Officer Grant's history of similar protocols. Darnell's firehouse files appeared on screen. Page after page of complaints, all involving young black drivers, all dismissed or buried. Grant's face reddened as the documents scrolled past. Perhaps most telling, the prosecutor continued, is this pattern's connection to a case this tribunal recently reviewed, the wrongful conviction of Marcus Bennett. Celeste stood then, holding up a small digital recorder. The tribunal has accepted into evidence this audio recording made by Marcus Bennett before his death. It was part of a secured legacy file, intended specifically for this kind of proceeding. She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the courtroom, steady, clear, and haunting. I'm recording this because I know how the system works. Officer Grant didn't just target me. He built his career on targeting people who look like me. I watched from my cell as he did it to others. Young men pulled over for suspicious behavior. Cars seized without cause. Lives derailed by false charges. He called it cleaning up the streets. But what he really meant was keeping us afraid, keeping us in our place. I'm leaving this testimony because I know he won't stop. And somebody needs to be ready when he comes for the next Marcus Bennett. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Grant's lawyer whispered something urgently in his ear, but Grant shook his head, his arrogance resurging. That's just the statement of a convicted felon, Grant sneered. A criminal trying to... A wrongfully convicted man, the prosecutor corrected sharply, whose case has been vacated due to your documented misconduct. And speaking of documentation, the next video was from inside the Mustang, Grant's own words during his panic-filled captivity in the AI-controlled car. His voice crackled through the speakers. Why do they always gotta act like they're victims? The judge leaned forward, her eyes boring into Grant. The mask finally cracked completely. Everyone in the room could see it now. The raw prejudice, the abuse of power, the years of systematic oppression wrapped in a badge and uniform. The tribunal panel took less than 2 hours to reach their decision. When they returned, the head panelist stood, her voice firm and clear. Officer Grant's conduct represents a fundamental betrayal of public trust and a pattern of racial discrimination that cannot be ignored. This tribunal recommends immediate termination, full forfeiture of pension and benefits, and referral for criminal prosecution. As court officers approached to escort Grant out, he turned and locked eyes with Zaria. His face twisted with a mixture of hatred and fear, the look of a man who'd finally lost the power he'd clung to for so long. Zaria met his gaze without flinching, without the slightest hint of satisfaction or revenge. Her voice carried clearly across the now silent courtroom. You were never the law. You were just scared of losing control. 1 week after the tribunal, Zaria stood in the center of a vast empty garage on the east side of town. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long rectangles across the concrete floor. The air smelled of old motor oil and possibility. Peeling paint curled from the walls like autumn leaves, and exposed pipes traced industrial patterns across the ceiling. She held a rolled blueprint in her hands, occasionally consulting it as she walked the perimeter. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space. The building wasn't much to look at now, but the community had rallied together to secure it for Project EOP. Every step she took sparked visions of what could be. Workbenches lined with tools, computers humming with code, young minds learning to protect themselves through technology and knowledge. The main garage door squeaked open and a group of people filed in. Contractors in work boots carried measuring tapes and tablets, while 2 engineers discussed electrical requirements. Behind them came a cluster of teenagers, some wearing coding club t-shirts, others in automotive shop jackets from the local high school. Their excited whispers bounced off the bare walls as they took in the potential of the space. "This is really happening," one girl whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the space. She ran her fingers along an old workbench, as if already imagining the projects she would build there. Darnell's fire truck pulled up outside, its red paint gleaming against the building's weathered exterior. He and two other firefighters began unloading equipment, toolboxes, work lights, and basic safety gear they'd gathered from various stations around the city. The sound of their boots on concrete and friendly banter added life to the empty garage. "First delivery," Darnell called out, wheeling in a cart of power tools. The union took a vote. Anything decommissioned but still working comes here first. His smile was wide and genuine, pride evident in his stance as he surveyed the space. Zarya smiled, marking off another item on her checklist. "This is perfect, Darnell. Thank you." She squeezed his arm in gratitude, the gesture saying more than words could. A young woman with purple-streaked hair and multiple laptops set up at a folding table in the corner. Maya, the coder friend who'd stuck by Zarya through the STEM program controversy, waved her over excitedly. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. "You've got to see this," Maya said, spinning one laptop around. "First beta of the EOP platform." Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of creation. The screen displayed a sleek interface reminiscent of a video game menu but with clear educational purposes. Different modules glowed invitingly: AI integration basics, security system architecture, know your rights, and auto mechanics 101. Each section was gamified, with achievement levels and practical challenges. The graphics were simple but engaging, designed to draw in young minds. The legal defense module pulls from actual case law, Maya explained, clicking through demonstrations. Kids learn their rights while earning points and unlocking new skills. And look, the automotive section uses AR. Point your phone at any car part, and it identifies it, explains its function, and shows you how to work on it safely. Zarya watched as a 3D engine assembly rotated on screen, each component highlighted with detailed annotations. "This is exactly what we needed. How many kids can we start with?" She leaned closer, already imagining the faces of young people discovering their power through knowledge. "Platform supports up to 500 users in beta. We can scale up from there." Maya's fingers tapped a few more keys, bringing up a registration page ready for their first participants. The garage door opened again. A woman carrying professional camera equipment stepped inside, her press badge catching the light. "Ms. Bennett? I'm Sarah Chen from Frontline Documentary Films. We'd love to do a feature on your story. The fight for justice, this new program, all of it." She held her camera at the ready, clearly hoping for an immediate interview. Zarya shook her head politely but firmly. "I appreciate the interest, but I'm not the story here. Follow the kids we're building up. I'm not the point." She gestured toward the teenagers already exploring the space, their energy filling the room. "But your father's case, the AI system, taking down Officer Grant. People need to hear about this," Sarah pressed, stepping closer with an eager expression. "They will," Zarya replied, gesturing to the teenagers already clustering around Maya's computer. "Through the changes these kids make, through the systems they build to protect their communities. That's the real story." Her voice carried quiet conviction that made Sarah pause. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. She turned her camera toward the growing activity in the garage instead, capturing the birth of something meaningful rather than focusing on the past. Later that afternoon, Zarya's phone buzzed with a notification from her bank. An anonymous transfer had just cleared, enough to purchase the property outright. She stared at the screen, stunned, until Celeste called. "The judge," Celeste said without preamble. "The one who vacated your father's conviction. She did it through a blind trust. Said it was restitution, not charity." Even through the phone, Celeste's voice carried the weight of justice finally served. Zarya leaned against a wall, overwhelmed by the quiet justice of it. Around her, the garage hummed with activity. Contractors marking measurements on walls, teens helping Darnell sort tools, Maya's keyboard clicking as she refined the platform's code. The space that had been empty hours ago now buzzed with purpose and promise. As evening approached, the space gradually emptied. Promises to return tomorrow. Plans taking shape. Hope building with each small step forward. Handshakes and hugs exchanged at the door carried the energy of a movement just beginning to find its strength. Finally alone, Zarya sat on an overturned crate, unwrapping a sandwich her mother had packed. The empty garage felt different now, full of echoes and possibilities. She pulled out her phone and played her father's final AI message, letting his voice fill the space. The familiar words washed over her. His warnings about the system, his hopes for the future, his faith in her strength. When the message ended, Zaria looked around at the bare walls and empty floor that would soon become Project EOP's headquarters. The fading sunlight cast long shadows, but they no longer seemed ominous, just the natural transition from one day to the next. "I know what to do now," she said aloud, her voice steady in the darkness. "You built the car, I'll build the road." Her words hung in the air, a promise and a pledge that seemed to make the very walls of the garage stand a little straighter. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official markings stark against the white envelope. Zaria stood at her front door, examining the return address from the state correctional facility. Her hands didn't shake as she signed for it, though her heart beat a little faster when she recognized the inmate number. Number 32871. Officer Grant, or rather, former Officer Grant. Inside, she sat at her kitchen table, the morning sun casting long shadows across the wooden surface. The envelope felt heavy, weighted with more than just paper. She opened it carefully, methodically, the way her father had taught her to handle important documents. The handwritten letter inside was 3 pages long, the penmanship neat and controlled, probably written and rewritten several times before being sent. Zaria unfolded the pages, smoothing them flat against the table's surface. "Dear Ms. Bennett," it began, "I don't expect you to read this and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away, but I need to write it anyway." The words that followed were a confession, an apology, a plea for understanding. Grant wrote about his training, about the subtle and not-so-subtle ways he'd been taught to view black civilians as threats. He described how the department's culture had reinforced his biases, how promotions and praise came easier when you kept certain neighborhoods in line. "I was trained to fear people like you," he wrote, "to see threats where there were none, to assume the worst about your father, about you, about anyone who looked like you. It wasn't right. It was never right." The letter continued, describing his first months in prison, how being on the other side of power had taught him clarity. He wrote about watching the news coverage of his case, seeing the evidence mount, realizing how many lives he'd damaged or destroyed. "I know sorry isn't enough," the letter concluded, "but I am sorry, and I ask for your forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because carrying this weight of what I've done is unbearable. I see now what I couldn't or wouldn't see before." Zaria read the letter once, her expression unchanging. The words were filled with guilt, heavy with self-pity and empty regret. She didn't cry. She didn't crumple the pages or throw them across the room. She didn't feel anger surge through her body. Instead, she felt a deep, quiet certainty about what needed to be done. She changed into a simple black dress, picked up her car keys, and drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the headstones, and a gentle breeze rustled through the nearby trees. Marcus Bennett's grave was well maintained, with fresh flowers from her mother's visit earlier that week. Zaria sat cross-legged on the grass beside the headstone, running her fingers over the engraved letters of her father's name. She pulled out Grant's letter and began reading it aloud, her voice clear and steady in the quiet cemetery. "Dear Ms. Bennett," she began, reading each word without rushing, letting them fall into the space between her and her father's stone. The breeze picked up slightly, turning the pages as she read. When she finished, Zaria sat in silence for several long moments. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp sheet of white paper. With deliberate movements, she folded it perfectly, creating sharp, clean creases. She slipped the blank page into the return envelope Grant had provided. Back home, Zaria sealed the envelope carefully. She didn't add any note, any explanation. The blank page would say everything she needed to say. She drove to the post office and dropped it in the outgoing mail slot, watching it disappear into the darkness below. Later that evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing blueprints for the EOP garage renovation, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She clicked it open to find a major development. The federal case against Grant's former unit was moving forward. The headline mentioned her evidence as the foundation of the investigation. Multiple officers now faced indictments for systematic civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and abuse of power. The article detailed how the investigation had expanded beyond Grant himself, reaching into the department's upper ranks. Prosecutors were using the AI footage, Darnell's Firehouse files, and Marcus's hidden documentation to build a case against the entire corrupt system that had protected officers like Grant for decades. Zaria walked through the quiet streets to the EOP garage, unlocking the heavy door and stepping into the cavernous space. The Mustang sat in its usual spot, moonlight gleaming off its polished surface. She slid into the driver's seat, running her hands over the familiar steering wheel. The AI system hummed to life, sensing her presence. In Marcus's gentle voice, EOP spoke softly through the speakers. "You gave them proof. But more than that, you gave them a plan." Zaria's fingers traced the outline of her father's necklace, the words, "Proof always wins," catching the dim light. "No second chances," she whispered into the quiet car. "Just better beginnings." Months had passed since the tribunal, and the old garage had undergone a remarkable transformation. What was once a peeling, empty shell now hummed with energy and purpose. The Project EOP Youth Lab's grand opening drew a steady stream of visitors through its newly installed glass doors. Inside, polished concrete floors stretched beneath bright LED lights. Classic cars lined the walls like sleeping giants, each one a project waiting to happen. Rows of workstations filled the central space, where teens in navy blue jumpsuits moved with purpose between diagnostic equipment and computer terminals. The air buzzed with the sound of power tools and excited chatter. At one station, a girl with tight braids and focused eyes carefully installed a high-resolution camera into a Crown Victoria's bumper. Her fingers moved with precision as she connected the delicate wiring, double-checking the connection on a tablet beside her. Nearby, a lanky boy in thick-rimmed glasses hunched over a recovered scooter, its frame still bearing the marks of its time in the police impound lot. His fingers flew across a keyboard, programming new security protocols into its electrical system. The screen before him displayed lines of code that would make the vehicle impossible to steal again. Several students gathered around a row of screens showing 3D mechanical diagrams. They debated the best ways to integrate AI systems into older model vehicles, their young voices confident and passionate. The walls displayed educational posters about vehicle security, coding basics, and legal rights during traffic stops. At the front of the space, Zaria stood on a small platform, her father's necklace catching the light. The crowd quieted as she began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the space without need for a microphone. "Welcome to Project EOP," she said, her eyes scanning the gathered faces, students, parents, community members, and even a few city officials trying to look inconspicuous in the back. "Some of you might expect me to talk about justice today, about fighting back or proving points." She paused, glancing at a young girl who was showing her mother how to run a diagnostic scan on an engine. "But that's not what this space is about. This isn't about justice. It's about what we build when they think we're too broken to try." The crowd murmured in agreement. Zaria continued, "Every car here has a story. Every student here has a story. And now together we're writing new ones." She gestured to the workstations around her. "We're not just teaching mechanics and coding, we're teaching power. The power to protect yourself, to understand your rights, to build something that can't be taken away." As Zaria stepped down from the platform, Celeste moved forward, holding up an official-looking document. Her sharp suit contrasted with the industrial setting, but her smile was warm and genuine. "I'm pleased to announce that Project EOP has secured ongoing funding through the city's education initiative," she announced. "The City Council has voted to include our program in its annual education grants, ensuring we can continue to expand our reach." The news was met with applause and cheers from the students. One of the city council members in the back shifted uncomfortably, probably remembering the heated debates that had preceded this decision. Darnell stood at a testing station surrounded by a group of eager students. He adjusted a sensor on an engine block while explaining the calibration process. "See this right here? This tells you everything you need to know about what's happening inside. No secrets, no surprises. He grinned at the teenagers. I'll tell you what, this place has more future in it than City Hall. The students laughed, but their eyes remained fixed on his hands as he demonstrated the proper technique. They took turns practicing, their movements becoming more confident with each attempt. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd thinned out. Zaria found herself walking alone through the garage, her footsteps echoing in the quieter space. She passed a row of Mustangs, each one rebuilt by different student teams. Despite their varying colors and modifications, they all shared one detail: a tiny micro-etching near the gas cap that read, "Built by those they tried to silence." She stopped at her father's Mustang, still gleaming as proudly as ever. At her approach, EOP activated, the familiar hum of systems coming online filling the air. "Diagnostic complete," Marcus's voice said softly through the speakers. "All systems." There was a pause, almost thoughtful. Evolving. Zaria opened the driver's side door and slid into the familiar seat. Her hand found its place on the steering wheel, but she didn't reach for the key. Instead, she sat quietly, letting the peaceful moment wash over her. Behind her, the sounds of the remaining students at work created a symphony of purpose. The whir of drills, the tap of keyboards, the metallic clang of tools being selected and replaced. Laughter erupted from one corner where a team had successfully completed their first security system installation. Through the windshield, Zaria could see the last rays of sunset streaming through the high windows, catching on the newly installed metalwork above the main door. The words, crafted in strong, clean lines of steel, seemed to glow in the evening light. "Legacy is not what they give us, it's what we forge." If you enjoyed the story of Zaria, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.